This is not really an organized forum. Kelly is just back from the American Academy of Religion in San Diego, California, right? You're just like hot off the plane. And so this is not like an organized program, but we thought, given the events of this last week, we would make a couple of observations and then really have a conversation with you all about the church and how the church responds to the events in Ferguson, both the grand jury process and the decision and the next steps and the sort of civil unrest that's resulted from that, because it just seems to us an important matter for Christian folks to think about. Bishop Buddy and I released a statement that's on the website of the diocese and on the website of the cathedral. I won't read it to you, but it's there, and she and I worked on that statement together because we wanted to speak. We felt that the situation was so serious that we felt that we should speak with one voice about how we feel Christians should respond. So that's there on our website if you want to find that. So what's going to happen is Kelly and I are just going to say a couple things, and then we're just going to, I think Patty's coming forward, and can you take the mic at some point, Patty, and just circulate among people? And we really want this to be a conversation more than a forum. And the reason we're doing it in this space, 3,000 seat space, we want to do it over here where it's a little more intimate, but logistically we just couldn't make that work this morning. So we're here in a big room, and Saul Alinsky always said, never organize in a big room, organize in a small room, because then it feels like you're really, really full. So we'll reach out to each other. So you all know me. I think I'm Gary Hall, the dean, and my colleague here, Kelly Brown Douglas, is an Episcopal priest who has been assisting with us for about a year now, a little more, and is also a professor of, religion at Goucher College, and is a theologian, has a new book coming out actually about some of these issues, and is a great gift to us here at the cathedral. And Kelly and I and a couple of other clergy did a similar response to the original shooting in August that is also on our website. So welcome, Kelly. And thank you for coming from San Diego directly to the cathedral. So I guess the first thing I'll just throw out, because Kelly's the theologian, is so why does this matter to Christian people? Why is this a concern? Why is the ongoing situation that Ferguson represents and the recent events of this week, why should that be of concern to Christian people and a Christian community?
I guess when I think about it, the first thing that comes to my mind is the one synonym that we would probably use for God, and that's love. And when I think of the love of God, then we think about what does that mean. And I recalled all through actually this week the words, I believe, of Gustavo Gutierrez, who is a Latin American theologian of liberation. And Gustavo Gutierrez said that justice is the love of God made manifest. And I think that's why this situation is of concern to who we are as Christians. Because if we truly believe in the love of God, and if we as Christians are to at least witness to that love, or to be at least a glimpse of that love in the world, then that means that we have to be a people who are on the side of and doing justice. So I'll sort of stop there because I could keep going.
All right, I'll give another take while Andy brings your tea up. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you so very much.
Before I was dean here, I was a seminary dean and professor, and my subject was Anglican studies. I taught Anglican theology in the seminary. And our great theologian of Anglicanism was a man named Richard Hooker, who wrote about the time of Shakespeare was writing his great tragedies. He wrote a big 6-volume book called The Laws of Ecclesiastical Polity. And Hooker, because the Church of England, which is our parent church, was the established church, he was trying to make an argument for why there would be a reformed established church as the Church of England. And the word that he used that became the kind of watchword of Anglicanism was the word commonwealth. That the church is not just the gathered of the, more Protestant vision of the church would be the church is the elect gathered from a sinful world. Our more Catholic view of that is that we are a group of people who are working with the world to redeem the world, to participate with God in healing and redeeming the world, and that therefore we have an investment in and an interest in the common good. And as I've come to think about the cathedral more and more, and how places like this are involved in the society, Christians have a stake in the common good, it seems to me. Regardless of, that's not an ideological statement, that's not a political statement, but God made the world and God loves the world and we are in the world, and part of our job is to actually, I think, argue for and work for and act and agitate for things that serve the common good. And obviously, as an American, America, the issue of race and racial injustice is at the heart of our common life as a people. I don't think any impartial observer could disagree with that statement. From not only pre-colonial times to the early republic to the Civil War to my entire lifetime has been taken up with questions of race and racial inequality and the racial history of America. So it seems to me that if we're going to be doing our job as an Anglican faith community in America in the 21st century, we have to be involved in issues of racial justice because they're really central to the common good. And I would say the thing that, if you see the New Yorker, the New Yorker that hits the stands tomorrow, their cover, some of you may have seen this, is the St. Louis Arch, and one side of it is black and one side of it is white, but they can't quite touch each other. And it does seem to me that we really do inhabit a nation right now that is extremely divided on these issues. I wouldn't say it's divided white and black, because I think there are people of color and white people on both sides of this issue, but it seems to me there are people in our culture that kind of get that the culture doesn't seem to care very much about young black men being shot, and other people who don't believe that. And I think we've got a gulf we've got to figure out how to bridge, and I think the church needs to be invested in at work in that. So that would be kind of my argument.
Well, no, I agree with that wholeheartedly, and I do believe that this issue of race in our country, some call it the original sin, but it is certainly an issue that, for whatever reason, this country won't face squarely. And until we do, and until we face that which divides us, then we are going to continue to be divided in these incidents, which aren't just isolated incidents. And that's one of the things that I think sometimes many people in our country don't understand, and particularly as people of color in the black community responds to a Ferguson, responds to a Trayvon, responds to the endless things that continue to happen, that they aren't isolated incidents. Right. They're part of a long history of racial injustice in the country. And longer than that, they're part of a manifestation of what some, as I said, like a Robert Bellow would call the original sin of the nation. And so until we do the uncomfortable work of digging deep and talking about this issue of race, then I think that then we are not serving the common good. And I believe that the church always has to be in those uncomfortable places.
Now, I want to give people adequate time to really engage in conversation. I do want to say one more thing, because when the bishop and I released this statement, which we thought was as bland and uncontroversial as we could make it, we got some blowback. And we got blowback essentially for questioning the grand jury process. And it's so interesting about America and our sense of, I actually got a very angry email from a gay friend of mine who had applauded me endlessly when I announced we would be doing same-sex weddings here, and was enraged that I questioned the integrity of the grand jury process. And I said to him, you know, you didn't have a problem with me questioning Scripture, but when I questioned the legal system, you seem to have an issue. And of course, I think part of the role of the Christian community is to be not just an endorser of the status quo, but a critic of the status quo. But what Marianne and I said in our statement was, after a grand jury process that many legal experts have called into question, and I can go into the details of that if people want, the people who were upset had further evidence that in the American justice system, the lives of black youth are valued less than those of their white counterparts. I can't tell you how that statement, which seems to me self-evident on its face, struck a nerve in white people in our orbit. So can you say a little bit about the difference between we really do seem to be in a system now where white people and people of color see things differently. And do you have any thoughts about, I know you've just written a book about all this, do you have any thoughts about why that is? I mean, my sense would be that the system works for me.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, you know, no one questions me when I go out walking at 5 in the morning, and no one follows me when I'm driving around at night. So I think the system's, my experience would tell me the system is fair.
Exactly. And I think in many respects, Gary, your sermon this morning hit on that when we're the privileged ones, then it's very hard for us to see outside of our privilege and to see when things aren't working. And so when that which we have called the norm is our own cultural and racial and experience, then it's hard to see that the norm isn't universal because it works for us. And so I agree with you that one of the things that has to happen is that people have to be able to step outside of their privilege and to see those that are on the underside of that. And so one of the experiences, and people, so many people have talked about it in the news, et cetera, that it's just common everyday understanding and practice for black people to understand, particularly our black boys to understand that when they walk out the door, there is no assurance that their life is not at risk, simply because of the fact that they're black and male. And so when you grow up with that, then when you grow up with that experience, you of course see the world differently. But you don't take for granted, I guess I should put it another way, you don't take for granted justice. I think one of the ways to put it succinctly is that as we awaited for the grand jury decision, and they did a poll that of course showed that most black Americans were not surprised, had hoped to be surprised, but were not surprised by the grand jury decision. And the lack of surprise was not because they thought it would be a just decision, but the lack of surprise was because we believed it would be the same old, almost a reenactment of the 1857 Dred Scott decision, that this justice system doesn't protect the rights of its citizens of color, in this instance of black citizens. But I think it is all a matter of recognizing one's privilege.
Just one more thing I'd like to say. I have another question I would ask you, and then we'll sort of throw it open. The other response that Marianne and I got was that some writers thought that we were assuming that Officer Wilson was guilty. I'm not making that assumption at all. I don't assume he's guilty. I don't even assume that he would be convicted if brought to trial, given the laws of the state of Missouri as I understand them. But what I am assuming is that given the range of evidence, as I just read it in the paper, there was probable cause to indict him at least for one of the lower manslaughter charges. And so I just read the evidence differently than the grand jury did. And I do think the anomalies of having a prosecutor who didn't pick a charge, but essentially gave 12 lay people 5 charges to choose between, and threw every bit of evidence and made them decide. So he didn't have a charge he was going towards, which is the usual case in grand jury processes, and B, let the defendant testify without any cross-examination. I mean, defendants never testify in grand jury hearings. And so there were enough anomalies in the process, and just reading the Post and the Post and the New York Times, and the Guardian actually in England did a wonderful story about it. When I read the evidence, I say, well, you know, there's beyond a reasonable doubt, there's clear and convincing, which are the 2 major standards, and then there's probable cause. And, you know, I think, just as an observer, that they had probable cause at least to bring it to trial. And that is where I'm not presuming that he's guilty at all, but I am saying, I thought given the range of evidence and the range of disagreement, there was enough there that would have warranted a trial, and that's my point.
Yeah, no, look, the way I see it, at least common sense could have prevailed. If indeed you have a people who have a history of being disenfranchised, who have up to this point right after Michael Brown's shooting, have indeed voiced how they feel disenfranchised, have voiced their distrust of the criminal justice system, have voiced their distrust of the prosecutor. If you have then let's move the pawn. When in doubt, move the pawn. Let's err on the side of justice. So we aren't talking about finding this man guilty. We are simply talking about going to trial so that you can at least have a show, if nothing else, of justice. And so what's baffling to me, given the tenseness that surrounded it in the first place, that at least the safest move, it would seem to me, was just go to trial. And we aren't presuming that he's going to be found guilty, as we aren't presuming that he's going to be found innocent, but we're going to put all of the evidence there, let all of the witnesses come before the public, and let everybody see what's going to happen, and so that you have at least a show of justice. And so it seems to me, by not even going to trial, all that did, or all it has done, was confirm the worst suspicions of the black community in Ferguson in the first place, that there was never any intention for justice to be served in this instance. And so I think you're right. You know, whatever charge they decided to bring him, to indict him on, at least have a show of justice and go to trial. And that's all the people were asking for. And so that's why the whole thing is curious.
Do you think the reaction would have been as bad if he'd been gone to trial and been acquitted?
No, I mean, it's hard to predict depending on what the trial revealed, because of course we know what happened in the Trayvon instance, Trayvon Martin instance. But I think my guess would be no, because at least you would have had everyone could have seen the evidence before us. And all of these witnesses, including the police officer, if he chose to get on the stand, would have been cross-examined. And so you could have had at least a public airing, and you would have also had time for people to begin even more to engage the process and engage what was going on. And so, no, I think it would have been a different response.
The other thing I would say is that I don't want this to be entirely hopeless. I mean, right after the Trayvon verdict, there was a conversation at one of the Episcopal churches here in Washington, and the bishop was part of it, and I just went as an observer, and it was about police relations. And we live in a city, in my hometown of Los Angeles, there are cities that have really do this very differently, and their police relations with the community are very different. And one of the problems with Ferguson is you've got, like in many cities across the country, you still have a majority African American city with a white police force, and that you've got a sort of a built-in conflict there in a way that some other cities have really. Los Angeles, there was a similar shooting of an unarmed black boy, young boy, in the summer, but the police and the community were able to come together in a very different kind of way, and not to exonerate the policemen at all, but to say that they really responded in a different. It doesn't have to roll out the way it rolled out in Ferguson from the government's point of view. I mean, it can roll out in a different way. And so it's not like people turn to the protesters and say, aren't these protesters awful? Well, let's remember that America started with a riot, right? The Boston Tea Party, it started with a riot, the Haymarket riots. I mean, we've had riots over centuries because when people have felt unheard, what is it King said, the riot is the language of the unheard. But our country began in protest.
Right, and yes, I agree with that. And I know we'll open it up to two things. One brief point that also raises the suspicion, the anger, et cetera, of this lack of indictment with the grand jury. What is it? 1 out of 11,000 times the grand jury doesn't return an indictment. And so, and here we are, because it's really a benign thing. And my father and my sister worked in the criminal justice system. So really a grand jury indictment is basically benign. You go to trial. They aren't saying you're guilty. They aren't saying that you're not guilty, but we have enough evidence to take you to trial. And so grand juries usually return indictments. And so it's a curious thing that once again, they didn't return an indictment in this case. The other thing is you speak about, yes, King did indeed say that riots are the language of the unheard. And even as King, of course, was he was against violent responses, but because what King understood was that there had to be a way to break the cycle of violence. And what King understood as violence is something that I think we have to, as a nation, again, we have to understand that violence isn't simply that which takes place on the streets and the actions of these protesters. That is the violence that violence has created. Right. Injustice is violence. And so we are in a cycle of violence, and it is funny that our nation was built on violence. We don't want to say, but that it was built on a foundation of injustice. But when we think about the original sin of the nation with the holiday that we just celebrated, maybe we can say that in terms of the treatment of the Native Americans. But the point of the matter is that if we are going to get out of this cycle of violence, then we have to begin, we're back to the beginning of this conversation, that begins with doing justice, because injustice is violence. And so when you have injustice, you have to expect at some point in time another violent response.
Right. Okay, Canon Patty Johnson, I saw somewhere with the microphone. There she is. I just open it up to conversation now. I would be just interested to hear other people's thoughts about this issue and where the church should be in relation to it.
Thank you. And thank you for the conversation. With regard to a theological perspective, my question is with regard to the dehumanization of Black American children. There are several comments from Darren Wilson, for example. He was scary. He looked like Hulk Hogan. And several people, he should be convicted. He was huge. He was scary. So my issue from a Christian perspective is, how do we get out of this dehumanization of African Americans?
Yeah. Wow. You want to say something?
Well, I'll let you respond as
well.
well.
I would just say what's interesting also, if you actually read the transcript, he said it looked like the demon.
Exactly.
And then he said he felt like Hulk Hogan, a 5-year-old boy trying to grab Hulk Hogan, and this peculiar kind of it just felt like I was back in the world of comic books or something, reading him. But you're right. It's not only the demonization; it's the objectification of a person. In other words, it's treating it's treating a person not only as evil, but it's treating a person as an object. And again, and we're in a culture that could, when you look at some of that slave stuff in the 19th century and slave markets and price lists and advertisements, I mean, where they really commodified human beings, it seems to me entirely consistent with that.
Yeah, well, it is. It's consistent with the history, and it goes part and parcel with racism when it comes to the black body. And one of the things and one of the ways in which to serve oppression and to subjugate a people is to demonize a people and to take them out of the category of being human. And one of the things that we always have to understand that has happened to the black body, that the black body in this country has historically been a dehumanized body, because our primary identity in this country, the fundamental identity of this country for the black body, was as chattel. Right? As Gary has just spoken, the commodified body. So that has been a part of the history, is to demonize. And it's not simply, we're talking in this instance of the black body, but in any instance when for an oppressed people, in order to keep a people oppressed, you typically demonize those people. The practical reality of this in this country is there have been several studies that have been done, and particularly with police forces. And one study, it's a long title and I can't call it a title, but they ran a study where they showed police officers different images of individuals, black and white individuals, white and black police officers, and some with guns. Some of the images of those were people with guns, and there were other images of people without guns, men, that in every instant, they were more likely to make a mistake and fire first when it was a black image, whether or not that image had a gun. They were more likely to make a mistake and not fire at all at the white image, even when the white image had a gun. And so what's very frightening, and particularly when we have such laws that suggest if you feel threatened, that when people just see a black male body, they feel threatened. And there are numerous studies, again, that have shown that they even see that black male body with a gun. And so that's the frightening reality in which we live, and because it's a demonized body. And so if you listen to black radio, etc., many people within the wider black community picked up on this ideal that the Officer Wilson said that he came at him like a demon. And of course, when was it? The day before Thanksgiving or the Tuesday before Thanksgiving in Cleveland, Ohio, the little 12-year-old black boy that was playing in the park, shoot him up with his play gun. The police officers, and it's on the web, the police officers barreled into the park and they shot and killed the boy. And they said that they thought, this was a 12-year-old boy, they said that they thought the little boy was 20. Right? And so no questions asked, and they just shot and killed him. Now, of course, my first response to that is no black boy in America needs to have a toy gun. But because he's going to be mistaken as having a real gun. But the fact of the matter is that those officers saw that little boy as a threat and saw him as claimed to have seen him as a 20-year-old. And so you're right, and that's the frightening state of affairs that we have come to.
I saw other hands, yes.
Good morning.
Hi.
So it's not a really well thought out because I just got here, right? But it seems that we're approaching so much of this case in the dualistic right, wrong, black, white. I think it's way more complex. I mean, we have a 90-second incident that's grounded in some facts and some witnesses and different accounts and things like that. And then we have this whole larger how that 90-second incident is symbolic of race relations or law versus public good. It just seems way more complex, and almost all the analysis I see in the news, even a little bit here today, although we're trying to go a little deeper, is right or wrong. And I'm really puzzled to see, I'm grateful to see how this 90-second incident has turned into the riot. And I'm not thrilled the fact that shop owners have lost businesses because of this, and that we have a whole set of people in a community now who don't have jobs because of how violence manifests itself. But it seems like there's this 90-second incident, and then there's like, oh, the whole world's global relations around race, and we're not really. I wish we could just separate out this 90-second incident, because it's way bigger than that now, or it always has been way bigger than that. And I wish we could stop focusing on was the grand jury right or wrong and all that, and let's get to the deeper stuff. So it's more a comment than a question, and there you go.
Two thoughts, and then I'd be happy to see what Kelly says. You're right. One of my favorite, when I was in high school, President Kennedy was assassinated when I was in high school, and I became, like many people in that era, obsessed with the Kennedy assassination. And I am probably one of the few people that you know that as a teenager purchased all 26 volumes of the Warren Commission report and read them as a teenager. And I followed the Kennedy assassination for years and years and years. Well, that's not even a 90-second incident, right? And it's an incident that we'll never understand what actually happened on November 22nd, 1963. We just will never get there. And it's sort of like the great Kurosawa movie Rashomon, where you have this incident that happens and then it's retold from 4 different points of view. I think it is finally hard to get to the actual truth of what happened in that 90 seconds. Because, as a kind of postmodern pragmatist, I would say truth is made rather than discovered, right? So there are multiple truths about that 90 seconds. And I think you're right in the sense that we've taken that 90 seconds and we have constructed various narratives out of it. So, out of those seconds. So I think that's an interesting observation. I think, though, where I would probably disagree with you is I think that the whole thing is, it sort of takes the lid off of, I think we convince ourselves in America, if I heard 500 people tell me that Barack Obama's election meant that we were in a post-racial America, and then of course Henry Louis Gates gets essentially arrested in his own house, and you realize, well, it's not quite, So I think we have this. We keep the lid on this issue of race and our history, and certain events just make us take it off. And so you're right. I think to some extent we're never going to get to a retrieval process that will come to the truth of what happened in that 90 seconds. But we've got now. What's disappointing to me is that I saw the legal system play out in a way that you could have scripted from the Trayvon Martin history. And again, what we had was an underzealous prosecution. And so I think to me what's revelatory and disappointing about this is the way that predictable things have happened in the last week that could have played out differently. And I think that, to me, is the issue. But I think it's an interesting observation you make.
Yeah, no, I agree. I want to say 2 things, maybe 3. First, that Gary read the entire Warren report just indicates you're a nerd. But
You got that right.
Excuse me. But to segue...
Not just the report, the 26 volumes of evidence.
So you're a super nerd.
Yeah, that's right.
But to segue from that, One of the things that Martin Luther King Jr. said in response to the Kennedy assassination was that it's not as important to sort of determine what happened, but it's more important to determine why it happened. And he said what this incident, or the assassination was more than incident, what it indicates, one of the things that it indicates is that the nation is in need of deep soul searching. And I say that in relationship to the Ferguson incident, as well as the other incidents that have become a piece of this history, from Trayvon to Jordan Davis to Renisha McBride and others, that in this 90 seconds, it may not be as important to us to determine precisely what happened, because we won't. But what is important is for us to wrestle with why it happened. The other thing that I will say theologically is that this is what we can understand as a Kairos time. Right? In Kairos, we talk about Chronos time, which is the hour, the time of the day, or Kairos time we like to talk about as God's time, the right time. And it's a time that sometimes occurs, it's very chaotic, it's very disruptive, it's a crisis. You will remember, some of you will remember during the fight against apartheid that they, I think it was the ANC, put out a document called the Kairos document. And it's a time, we call it, I like to say, it's a time pregnant with the possibilities of God. Pregnant with the possibilities of God's justice. And one of the things that the Kairos does is it disrupts the way things are. It's chaotic. Now, you can miss the Kairos. Paul Tillich said that during World War II Germany, we missed the Kairos, right? You can miss the Kairos and not respond to what it is that God is trying to say and to get us to do. And I see this time in our history in this country as a Kairos time. And as disruptive and as uncomfortable as it is, we are called to a deep soul searching to respond to the justice of God. And that justice always, always, always makes you uncomfortable. And so I say that yes, those 90 seconds, it was 90 seconds in time, but those 90 seconds in time are revelatory. And so they call us to a point of soul searching. And so I'm not so concerned, even as I said, you know, whether or not certain people get indicted, the indictment of a person, the conviction of a person, that's not the justice of God that we're talking about. We're talking about overturning a justice system that's not just. And so that we don't get trapped in this cycle of violence, and that the cycle of violence is systemic and structural injustice. And so I think if anything comes out of this that's good, it causes us to do this deep soul searching and to ask these questions of why that happened, or, Bob, to your point, to ask why, not simply why did that happen, but why have people made this 90 seconds in time into a monumental event?
So
I guess.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
This is, in my world, this is all playing out in social media. I don't know about anyone else, but I'm an organizer, and so what I see is, you know, I mean, gosh, a lot of important feelings and conversations happening, and, you know, there's been a lot of, with my friends, a lot of really good conversations happening. But I have been disappointed or been trying to grapple with how we can get more white people to step into the conversation and take responsibility for being a part of the system that we live in, and that there should be, I mean, a lot of feelings of uncomfortableness. Like, I'm okay feeling uncomfortable and having the conversation. That's better than more black kids being shot and killed. And to feel, maybe even think for one moment, I heard There's this rapper, Killer Mike, who was in St. Louis the night that the lack of indictment came down, and he was crying, and he said, "I am terrified for my children." And I'm not living in that feeling of terror. I'm living in a feeling of uncomfortableness because I don't know what to do next, and I can't just post more articles about what white people should do on Facebook. So I guess what I'm wondering is, like, how does a church, how do Christians, beyond having a conversation like this, what is the role of this church and others, people of faith, to actually go beyond this conversation right here and do something?
I'll give you two quick thoughts about that. One of them is, if you really want to have a bad day, go and look at the cathedral's Facebook page and see what people have said in response to Marianne's and my statement. We've taken down, I gather, some of the most profane stuff, but there's some real ugly racist stuff said on there. And so I think that there's a way in which, I mean, are you just talking about social media? I mean, social media cuts both ways. I mean, it allows to have certain conversations, but also reveals certain attitudes that are scary. And similarly after the Muslim service, I mean, this is like in 2 weeks, we've just, again, taken the lid off, and all of this aggression, anger, and hatred comes out. My basic feeling about the church is the place we have to start is essentially in sort of self-analysis. In other words, I think it's very hard for us to point our... white churches are very comfortable pointing our finger at other places and saying, you know, you need to clean up your act. I think we need to start, frankly, with looking at ourselves, our own history as the Episcopal Church in America, the cathedral. We are in the whitest, most privileged, most affluent part of the District of Columbia. We're the cathedral for the Diocese of Washington. You know, 80 churches in the Diocese of Washington. I forget how many in the District of Columbia. But to what extent are we really present in the rest of the District of Columbia and in our city? Our worship is still largely white, English worship. I think we have to really look at ourselves first. Then I think we also have to do other things to foster some conversation. But, you know, racism, as I've learned over the years, as I've been taught over the years, is not just individual. It is interpersonal. It's just not only personal, it's interpersonal, it's social, and it's institutional. And to the extent that we can begin to look at our own enmeshment in structures of institutional and social and interpersonal racism, I think that's a start. I'm not saying we shouldn't be involved out there in the streets, but I think we've really got to look at ourselves.
No, I agree. And I think on the level, we all go back to communities, right? And in those communities, we have to begin to witness to a different story. It's not enough any longer to stay silent in our homes and in our communities. You know, it's not enough when we hear people say things that perhaps we don't agree with or that demonize others that we believe to be racist. It's not enough to keep quiet about it. We've got to challenge these narratives. Even in the places where we believe we're most comfortable, we have to sometimes be most uncomfortable. And I think that one of the things, I think it's easy for, in this instance we're talking about white-black relationships, I think it's easy for white people to be out there and to protest, but the hardest task is to be at home and to begin to change those narratives. And so that, as you perhaps are already doing, as you're talking about on social media, you talk to your friends, you're in places where we'll never be. And you're in places where you can change the narrative and the structures and the way things are done. You know, Gary's the dean of the cathedral. So he can do things. And so as a white male that in the dean of the cathedral, so that, to me, that's the hard job and the hard task. And and I simply say to people, imagine that you were that black mother, or imagine that that was your son. And somehow people don't see those children as children. And so even just if you would just begin that conversation so that I wouldn't have to feel so uncomfortable every time my son is out on the street. I think we're...
Yes, Patty. We have time for one more thought, observation, and then the vergers are giving us the hairy eyeball, so we need to move on.
I don't speak that well.
You speak well enough.
I think I've been mostly black all my life, predominantly so. I see a lot of hope. I really, really do. I grew up in the South. I went into the Navy. I've been in the Navy 31 years. And 40 years ago, we wouldn't have ever had this conversation. I see this is the conversation. The Kennedy killings, the 68 riots, the Trayvon Martin's, incidents after incident, that is the conversation. And you're gonna have more of it because demographics is changing so drastically, okay? And you're gonna have more of these incidents. You're gonna be frightened more because a lot of people are disenfranchised and they're gonna speak out in different ways. But the good thing about it is, if you can think of it that way, is that we are having the conversation. The social media that we have now and the awareness that we have now demands that we have the conversation. 40 years ago, this would have been swept under the rug. When I was in college, people wouldn't have even been on the front pages. To think that in my little town in Virginia, in Rocky Mount, Virginia, where I couldn't go to a restaurant and eat, we're now talking about a person of color and injustice being done to them. That's revolutionary in our country. And we should always, always know that that is God's total conversation to us in time. That I'm going to chip away at you as the human race to make you be better, okay? Even if it hurts, even if it makes you uncomfortable, even if there's violence to it. Not that I'm condoning it, but that is the conversation. And it needs to be broadened, and it needs to be talked about more, and you're going to. Regardless of whether you want to or not, you're going to. You're going to be confronted with it almost every day, because every day there's going to be an incident. Every day. And we're going to be forced to look at ourselves. Both black, white, Hispanic, it doesn't matter.
Thank you. Any concluding remark? We'll just say amen, brother.
Right,
Preach
I
it.
think that thank you.
There will be, in 2040, there will be no racial or ethnic majority in America. That scares some people, but it gives me hope. Thank you all so much for being part of this conversation.